The Honourable Member for Random Burn St. George's.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I stand today to speak in support of our Opposition Day motion. And I want to repeat it for those who may be listening in, that in the opinion of the House, the employment insurance plan announced by the government on September the 11th, 2014, and which will begin on January the 1st, 2015, will not create jobs and growth, but will instead provide a financial incentive for employers to lay off workers, and therefore the House urges the government to redirect those resources by providing employers an EI premium exemption on newly created jobs in 2015 and 2016. This is yet another example of a hopelessly misguided Conservative policy. The Conservative small business job credit is so flawed that it actually discourages job creation and economic growth. Quite simply, the Conservative proposal is bad for employers, bad for workers, and bad for the Canadian economy. The Conservatives' EI credit plan encourages businesses to stay small and punishes them if they grow and are successful. Under the Conservative scheme, only businesses with EI payroll taxes below $15,000 get any money back.
Terrible.
Moreover, despite being billed as a job credit, there is no requirement that companies actually hire new workers in order to qualify. And that in itself is mind-boggling, Mr. Speaker. The Conservative proposal lowers a business's EI rate from $2.63 to $2.24 per $100 of salary paid for any employer paying less than the threshold with no requirement for job creation. Regardless of whether a small business hires new workers, remains the same size, or even fires workers, so long as they remain below the $15,000 threshold, they qualify. This creates a perverse incentive for businesses to fire workers in order to get below the $15,000 threshold. Mike Moffat, professor of economics at the Ivy School of Business, expressed his concerns about the effect of this policy on wages, quoting, "It is clear that firms under the $15,000 EI threshold have a big incentive to keep wage increases to a minimum so they do not lose their tax credits. Conversely, firms that are just over the $15,000 EI threshold have an incentive to cut the pay of their staff in order to gain the tax credit." End of quote. But wages are not the only thing in danger under this plan, Mr. Speaker. In fact, the Conservative scheme offers up to $2,234.04 for firing a worker and only up to $190.52 for hiring a worker. This approach sets a dangerous precedent, especially in provinces like Newfoundland and Labrador, where over 5,000 Newfoundlanders and Labradorians who had a job this time last year are now out of work. My constituents in Random Burn St. George's and their fellow Newfoundlanders and Labradorians face unemployment rates well above the national average. On the Avalon Peninsula, unemployment is 8%. In Notre Dame, Central Bonavista, the rate is 16.4%. And in the South Coast Burin Peninsula region, the unemployment rate is 17.3%. More and more of my constituents are telling me they are struggling to make ends meet, and many of my constituents have had to look for work elsewhere. Mr. Speaker, what we need in Newfoundland and Labrador and in other parts of our country is more jobs, not less.
That's right.
The Harper government must do more to help create jobs instead of helping to drive high unemployment. For young workers, job creation is even more important. The situation faced by youth across Newfoundland and Labrador is even more troubling. Unemployment among youth ages 20 to 24 is 15.3%, higher than the average in Newfoundland and Labrador, and higher than their peers across the country. More and more young people graduating from college and university programs have high debt loads and absolutely no guarantee of finding a job. They are forced to move back home with their parents, and in many cases their parents, some of whom are also having trouble making ends meet, try to assume their debt load and living costs for their children, which jeopardizes the future for all involved. The best way to combat youth unemployment and to help create secure financial futures for all is with new jobs. And there's nowhere more important will this come up than in Newfoundland and Labrador, where we are finding such a high unemployment rate than the need for steady employment. At a time when youth employment is high and many students and recent graduates are struggling to find jobs or co-op placements, this government is continuing to compound the problem through its actions. Instead of providing incentives for businesses for eliminating jobs, Liberals believe in providing businesses with incentives to create jobs.
Hear, hear.
We have a solution, an EI premium exemption for new jobs created in 2015 and 2016. This represents a benefit of up to $1,279.15 for each newly created job. Now that's incentive. That's an encouragement to a business. The Liberal plan would represent a benefit of up to $1,279.15 for every new person hired by a company, which for the same price as the proposed EI premium exemption could produce over 175,000 new jobs. Mr. Speaker, this is a plan we know works. Under a previous Liberal government, similar incentives were offered through the New Hires Program as part of Budget 1997 and Budget 1998. That program, unlike the current Conservative plan, provided an incentive to create jobs rather than an incentive to eliminate them. And experts agree. Today, Professor Moffat concluded his latest piece writing, and I quote, "The New Hires Program provides a great framework for a new small business job credit. I hope the government will take the Liberals' suggestion seriously and correct the flaws in their current proposal." I too hope that the government will realize their error and admit that there is another way of making sure that we respond to the needs of Canadians, to the need for employment, especially among our young people. I hope the government would listen to the experts and vote in favor of the motion before us today. What Canadians from coast to coast to coast need the government to do is encourage job creation and growth, not stagnation. Businesses should be encouraged to create more jobs, whether the company pays $14,999 or $15,001 in EI payroll taxes. What's more, Mr. Speaker, is that small businesses agree. Just this afternoon, the Canadian Federation of Independent Business, whom the government members quote all the time, endorsed our proposed EI holiday for job creators, saying that it had, and I quote, "lots of job potential." It is also important, Mr. Speaker, to note that EI is a fund paid into by employees and employers, not the government. According to a report out of the Office of the Superintendent of Financial Institutions Canada, in 2015, the government is expected to collect $3.5 billion more in employment insurance premiums than needed. Even with the estimated $225 million proposed tax credit, which still means the Conservative government will be taking in $3.25 billion more than necessary. What this serves to do, Mr. Speaker, is to create the illusion of a larger surplus going into 2015. And we know that. We know what is happening with the cuts that are taking place under this government in terms of trying to create that surplus so they can do things leading up to the next election. As my colleague, the Honourable Member for Kings Hants has said, they're patting their books on the backs of workers and employers to fund a pre-election spending spree at a time when employment numbers are soft and growth has stalled. It's irresponsible for the governments to Conservatives to maintain high job-killing payroll taxes just to fund their pre-election budget. Canadians believe, and rightly so, the government has a responsibility to not only create the right conditions for economic growth, but also ensure that growth is sustainable. We need to create the right conditions for jobs and growth to benefit all Canadians. And what we have here, Mr. Speaker, is a tale of two policies. A Liberal proposal designed to create stable long-term job creation and to spur economic growth, and a Conservative policy that creates incentives to fire workers and discourages growth. Thank you.
Great. Questions and comments? Question, come on time.